You just saw in the last segment that efficacy and empowerment are more specific and more concrete than the buzzwords that they're often treated as. Now in this segment, we want to talk about the third angle of the employee engagement triangle, and that's a sense of self-worth. That's a funny thing to hear in a leadership training, giving employees a sense of self-worth, but you're going to see why it's so critical to getting that engagement from your employees. You're also going to see concrete steps that you can take to give them that sense of self-worth.
So again, our last thing here, our last element here for employee engagement, our employee engagement triangle, is a sense of self-worth. You know, for most people, one of their primary, if not their primary, but one of their major sources of identity and senses of self-worth is their job, right? So my question to you is, I want you to think about this for a second. How do your people feel about their employment? Is there a sense of pride there? And I worry about this in particular with public employees, because while this used to be a very, public service used to be very lionized and seen as a very noble calling in life. That has changed since the scandals of the 60s and 70s in politics and other things. There's a cynicism now towards government, and that has filtered down to the government employee. It's become a national pastime to bash the bureaucrat, right? And so my concern is that you and I we manage people who have this public service motivation. They're doing really important and in some cases incredible things with limited resources, and yet they don't feel good about what they do. Right? Or there's a tension between them feeling good about, wait, I'm helping people, and yet very often the very public that we're trying to serve disdains what they do, or they don't understand that they're doing incredible work. And so I'm really concerned about this. Well, aside from helping them find a sense of purpose and meaning, one of the things that we are sorely lacking in terms of helping people become engaged in their work is recognition. Right? And I want to talk about recognition and then POS. Don't worry, I will absolutely explain that acronym. Okay? But first, let's talk about informal recognition. This is not happening enough in our agencies. I have not yet, and I've done a training of some sort of another with personnel from every single agency across the state. I have not seen this done to a point where it becomes counterproductive. And in fact, the evidence is that point might not exist. So here are the elements that many of you have seen for how we make recognition useful. Be genuine, right? It's got to be sincere. You've got to be really finding something to say thank you for. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for working on this project. Thank you for being here. Thank you for deciding to spend most of your waking hours with our agency doing this role, this job, right? And this is what I meant by there's no... The evidence in organizations is there hasn't been a satiation point, a saturation point. That is, we don't really have agencies in the state where it's like, okay, if done right, this praise, this recognition is happening too often. It just isn't. We're so far from that it needs to be happening more. And this other one, be specific, is really important. You don't want to just sort of give the general, hey, sure, appreciate you. You know, that's politicking, that's glad handing, right? And one of the ways to make sure that you are specific when you are giving recognition to someone is do it as you give them feedback. If you are giving feedback more often, you will have more opportunities to give that kind of recognition, to say, hey, I saw you yesterday on the phone with a customer who was giving you a hard time, and I saw you not lose your cool. Way to keep your calm. That's really difficult to do and really impressive. I'd like to see more of that from our staff. That matters to someone. That keeps someone engaged in their job, okay? And then from behavioralism, we know that promptness matters, right? In any sort of reinforcement, positive or negative, the more prompt it is, the more likely the subject, using the scientific term, is to associate it with whatever it is that you're trying to praise in this case. So you see a behavior, the sooner you can praise it, the better that is, okay? Look at this from a study done in 2009. This, talking about informal recognition, this form of informal recognition not only conveys acknowledgement and appreciation, which matters, but also information for motivating subsequent desired behavior. So you are communicating to the staff, when you give them this kind of informal recognition, what you want to see more of, and guess what? You're more likely to get more of it, right? So that example I just gave of the employee on the phone with the difficult client, well, guess what? They're much more likely the next time that client is there, is being difficult, to be positive with them, to not lose their cool because you acknowledge that. That's powerful stuff, right? From the same study, think about this, right? For those of us that gripe about no money. Further analysis also indicated that these gains from non-financial incentives were sustained over time. Okay, so this informal recognition lasted, right? And when compared to financial incentives, had an equally significant impact. So this matters as much as someone's paycheck does, right? And it'd be great if we could give them this recognition with thousands of dollars. We can't, right? We're being asked to do more with less, kind of thing. But independent of those financial incentives, these kinds of non-financial incentives, informal recognition, appreciation, can have an equally significant impact. Okay, that's massive. That's massive. This is really important. What about formal recognition? This is Employee of the Month. This is those cards that you see in different organizations saying, I caught you doing something good. This is the Governor's Awards for Excellence. You know, whatever else it might be. This is something systematic that you do on a regular basis. So who do you give these things to? Here are just some guidelines. If you're going to have a formal recognition program, by the way, formal recognition is important and works as well. In fact, I remember my first job with the state. I was in training, and we used to laugh at an agency I worked at that they had an Employee of the Month program. We're like, oh, just like every company, you have Employee of the Month, blah, blah, blah. And we used to laugh at it and think it was goofy, and then I won it. And I was like, man, this is pretty cool. Like, I actually like this. And they actually did a really good job. It's because, you know, I didn't know it at the time until I received it. They did things the right way. So here's the who, what, how, and where of formal recognition. It's got to be seen as objective, okay? Or given for quality or performance or productivity or something that you're trying to have more of, because employees will assess the culture and climate of an organization based on what is rewarded. Okay, think about that. They will judge a culture and climate of an organization based on what's rewarded. That's one of the ways they will judge an organizational culture and climate. So what can you give? Well, sometimes you can give financial incentives, and if you can, great. If you can't, maybe admin leave, maybe prizes, maybe gift certificates. You still want to be specific for why they're getting it, and you want it to be specific to the individual that you're giving it. If you know something about this individual, for example, at the Governor's Award ceremony last week, the HR Executive Director, Debbie Cragen, gave the governor, was saying thank you to the governor for all his work, and actually gave him, and this is going to seem kind of goofy, but gave him a box of really nice cookies. She said, we all know you love cookies, and so we want to give this to you. That's specific, right? Look, she's not going to give the governor money or leave or anything like that, but saying something like, hey, we know this about you. Thanks for putting on this award ceremony and being a part of it and spending your valuable time here. And that mattered to the governor, right? How do you do it? How do you do formal recognition programs? Well, nominations can be part of it. It can be a point system, simply who's producing the most according to the data. It can be selected by committee, or you as the boss alone can say, hey, I've got to give it to this person, right? And generally, if it's a formal recognition program, it's public. Everyone knows about it. It's in print, and there are regularly scheduled meetings where it happens, right? Let me tell you when this becomes counterproductive. When it's just given out for no reason, you know, it's that kind of thing where, oh, everybody gets a trophy, or it's simply someone's turn, right? You've got a small enough unit, and so, well, here you go, it's your turn, you know, that kind of a thing. You want to be careful about that kind of that kind of approach to formal recognition. I love this from a book called "This Book Is Not for Sale," right? When you give people trophies, in this case as a reward, as a form of formal recognition, it's got to be about, it's just got to represent hard work, dedication, productivity, quality, whatever else it might be. It's not about the actual trophy itself. And I just love that the author says that's precisely why I don't have any trophies, you know, because it's about hard work and dedication. But this is what we're talking about. Oh, and before we conclude here, I want to introduce this concept that some of you may not have heard of, called POS. Not what you think. It stands for Perceived Organizational Support. What's interesting is there is evidence, there is hard data that employees are engaged to an organization's mission and to their job if they feel like the organization supports them as a person, right? So perceived organizational support is this. You've got a death in the family. Did your um, did your agency send flowers to the funeral? Did the executive director come and talk to you specifically and say, I am sorry, please take advantage of the bereavement leave or funeral leave. Let us know what we can do to help. Hey, if we need to take some things off your plate, we'll do that. You've got a sick child, you've got whatever it is. Do they recognize you? Do they support you in the outside of work, even as well as inside of work? And think about that, because the evidence is clear that if they do, employees are more engaged. And think about all the positives that come from that engagement that we talked about: productivity, motivation, less turnover, less absenteeism, et cetera, right? That's what POS stands for, okay? And that people receive that organizational support. They perceive it when they're getting recognized formally and informally, but there's also other ways ways you support them for things they're experiencing outside of the job, if that makes sense, right? There's an organizational commitment and engagement there. Now, I want to go back really quickly. I want to ask you a quick poll question that I skipped earlier, but I want to go back because I want to really drill these into your minds here. So let me show you here, again, the employee engagement triangle, that sense of purpose and meaning, a sense of efficacy or empowerment we might throw there, and a sense of self-worth. Well, with that sense of efficacy, remember we talked about three things to empowerment. There's that coaching competency, there is sharing information, and then there is creating autonomy through boundaries, right? Those are our three. So I want to ask you, which of those, we're going to put this on there, but which of those three elements of empowerment do you feel is most lacking in your agency right now? Okay, coaching competency, sharing as much information as possible, and creating autonomy through boundaries. So go ahead, we're going to give you just a few seconds to answer that. What do you think is most lacking in your agency right now? Okay, you answering that? We'll end in just a few seconds here. Okay. We've got coaching competency, interesting, coaching competency at 37%, sharing information at 37%, and creating autonomy through boundaries at 27%. Interesting. So actually all three of these are really, really close. I hope you'll see that. Even maybe you don't feel like above you, at, whatever managerial level you're at, or whatever level in the organization you're at, maybe you feel like those above you aren't doing these things. I want to encourage you to find ways to take these three elements of efficacy and empowerment and do something about it for the people that you have a responsibility for, okay? Because you can do something, even if it's not happening in your agency well enough. And the fact that it's split, especially between those first two, between the coaching competency and the sharing information, I thought sharing information might win out. But anyway, it's not surprising. You can do something about all three of those. Okay, find out what you can do and do something about it. Just remember our employee engagement triangle here, that sense of purpose and meaning, a sense of efficacy, and giving them that sense of self-worth in their job and what they're doing, okay? I want to conclude with this from Martin Luther King Jr., in particular, and then another quote. But I've always loved this quote. But look, I recognize that all of us, or the staff that we manage, we might not have the most exciting jobs in the world. Maybe you manage someone who's doing something they're like, look, it's not saving lives. I'm not the president of the United States. But look at what Martin Luther King Jr. said in a speech in 1957. He said, no matter what this job is, you must decide to do it well. Do it so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn can't do it better. If it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Raphael painted pictures. Sweep streets like Michelangelo carved marble. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well. Maybe you're not, none of us is president of the United States. Maybe we can't all be saving lives every day, but you're doing something. Help your people feel a need to do their jobs so well, whatever it might be, that they do it as well as Beethoven composed music and Shakespeare wrote poetry and plays, right? I love that from Martin Luther King Jr. because through engagement, through effective leadership from a direct supervisor whose behaviors matter more than any other single variable in creating motivation and engagement, you can help them feel that, increase at least somewhat that engagement in their job. And so not only are they happier finding that meaning and purpose and engagement, but the outcomes are better for the organization. And no matter what, if you're within the sound of my voice, you're doing something where our performance as an organization matters, right? This isn't just about increasing shareholder profits. You've got some public service that you are providing that it matters that you and I do it as good as possible, as well as possible, right? And so finally here from John Cotter, you're able to read this on your own, but again, remember, it's we motivate and we inspire and we engage people, not by saying, here's the carrot, here's the stick, but by satisfying their basic needs for achievement, sense of belonging, recognition, self-esteem, control over one's life, and the ability to live up to one's ideals or to realize values. That's what we're talking about here. Here's the good news. You and I can begin doing something today to increase people's engagement, their sense of engagement. Let's start doing that today, and we'll